Great.
Considering that the story itself has been out of the news cycle for years, what made you guys want to tackle this in documentary form?
We were getting ready to start a series on water,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a guy that was a first responder there that actually works with the Presbyterians, and he reached out to us and he said, if you're doing a series on water, then it has to start in Flint. And he was really just impacted by what he saw and the impact of lead. This was back in 2014, 15, end of 2014, and encouraged us to go up and visit. And so he talked to the folks that were there, some of the people that were working on the lead response, and they invited us to come. And so our first few trips were just to listen and to meet with people that were working in the response, meet with organizations, meet with community leaders, just people that were kind of on the front lines of all of this. And we talk about whether to do a film or not, and if we did, how would we do it? And they wanted to be a part of it. So this film has really been a partnership with the city and with the community, and we worked on it for over 5 years, and kind of let them guide us throughout the process. And so, we weren't sure where we were going. We were just going to listen and to try to understand what was happening and let them kind of guide us. And so the film kind of evolved with that kind of approach.
When was it that you found out just how much research you were going to have to do? Since this really spans back almost 7 decades to where this really started.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you kind of get that feeling that this is going to be one hell of an undertaking?
Unbelievable. Yes. Oh my God. Yeah. When you listen, when we were listening to people, they didn't want to start talking about, when the water crisis started. What they wanted to talk about was the history of this community and GM leaving, and how this 100 years of history and of dumping into the river and of policies that were in place and the systems that were in place kind of sowed the seeds for this crisis. It's not really a crisis; it's a condition. It's not something that just suddenly happened. Over the time period that the film covers, we kind of show the seeds that were sown for this to happen. The negligence by the state and everything. And so, when we listened to the people, that's where they wanted to start. They wanted to start with the history of the community. Flint was once a thriving, city, one of the wealthiest in the nation, and had, it was almost like Flint. We were talking about this earlier. Flint is kind of, when you look at the footage and also think about it, like Flint was what America was, that myth of America and what we aspire to be during that time. And it was once a great city. And, through all these years of neglect and dumping in the river and systemic issues, it's fallen apart.
And early on,
and this is Scott Lansing over here.
Early on, we had, in initial conversations with people that weren't in Flint, there was, I would say, a tone of negativity based on the last few years, probably the last decade or so, with an increase in crime and violence and such. And there was just a kind of general tone of negativity towards the city. And we really felt once we got in there, you get a sense of that there was a reason this city had gotten to the place that it had, which was a very challenged city. And once we started peeling back the layers and going back into the history, we were in shock. When we got a hold of footage of Flint in those early days, and even this afternoon, we were looking at some stuff, and it's mind-boggling as to how large the population was that was there, how successful it was, the size of those houses, and you can see a lot of that in Detroit as well. Coming from the South, I think it's different than the houses. When you go up into those areas, you really realize how large, expansive, and how well that city was doing at one time, and that really got us thinking. It helped to kind of have that outside perspective on it, I think.
And we went out to the old industrial sites. It's just miles of wasteland, just old where the factories used to be. And there was a retired factory worker that came up there with us, and just he kind of walked around and he just said, "Oh yeah, this is where I used to, this is where I used to work. This is the spark plug plant. This is where I used to have my lunch. This is where my family used to meet me over here." Like he had this whole vision of what it used to be. And you look around and you see barbed wire and wasteland, and what he saw was a glorious past. I mean, you could see it in his eyes as he walked around. I mean, just talking about, this is where I did this is where I did that. And he's in the film, actually, David. And that really struck us. And when we, after about an hour and a half out there with him, we were like, so is this ever going to come back? Is this ever a possibility? And again, and he just kind of, he looked really sad inside and was like, no, this is never going to be here again. We can never come back like this again.
And it seemed as we did the research that Flint had a lot more in common with a lot of America than it had a difference. That this was actually happening all over. That towns all over that were once industrial successes had been moved out of, and the cities were successful, and there were people left with memories and as we learned, a lot of pollution.
Do you guys foresee this kind of thing kind of snowballing into seeing more like instead of like ghost towns, ghost states, ghost meccas, just this remnant of post-industrialism kind of spreading throughout the entire country?
Absolutely. I mean, I think you're spot on. I mean, I could see it, like Scott was saying earlier, and we've seen this. It's happening in other cities, and I think we're kind of moving in that direction. And we've been dumping and contaminating our water and our air and our land, our ground, everything for so long that it's coming back now. And we're going to have to pay the price, and we need to figure out, how do we deal with this?
My biggest surprise going into this was finding out that rivers had been picked to be industrial rivers, and rivers have been picked to be drinking rivers. And I never knew that. I didn't have the history on that. So I thought that was important to bring to light that in its early heyday, that the lumber industry had decided, to use this river as an industrial river, and that led to long history in Flint of using the Flint River as an industrial river, which means that the people that lived in that town knew what that town was, and I mean, people that lived in that town knew what that water was and what it was used for, and everybody knew not to drink from this river. Mm-hmm. This was a known fact. They used to talk about everything from crime and bodies being dumped in the river and poisons, and it was kind of treated as a trash river. Then to see the collapse of the tax structure and the industry that had pulled out, and then what was left being basically forced on the people to drink from, was shocking.
To cut corners and save money. I mean, I guess as you saw.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's when I think it kind of hit us that the importance of watching Flint is that it has become a model in a lot of ways of how to deal with other areas. And we're seeing the echoes of Flint in New Jersey, in South Carolina, and places all over where things are handled almost the same. So we thought it was important for people to revisit this in depth to understand this is how history is created. This is what happens to rivers, and this is what happens to people when you end up with tax structures and failures that lead to high levels of pollution, and sickness and cancers and such are to follow. So we thought, well, it seems that we're heading into that era.
In the latter half of the documentary, there's a point where you start to look at the causes for why the issue was not taken seriously. It could be a racial issue. It could be a economic issue. Had GM and other businesses stayed in Flint, do you think the problem would have been resolved in a more expedited fashion, or was this going to just turn out the way it was going to turn out, regardless of if this was a economic booming area still?
You're saying if GM was still there and the area was still booming,
Mm-hmm.
would
I would say I would be fair to say that the economics of the 80s and the avoidance by the companies there to deal with environmental pollution that they had created indicated that it had gotten to a point where they'd rather pay fines than actually deal with environmental pollution.
Mm-hmm.
So they continued to do that, and then one of the most, I think, painful things to see was the sale of nationalism to join and unify a city under prosperity and economics. And the minute that it is not economically viable for an industry to be in an area, they pull out, and their people are left with a sense of wanting to support, and that area that is now gone, and they're left with that nationalism. They're left with that hope and that belief in believing that these industries are part of who they are as people. In actuality, they're not. Those industries kind of work and live and expand based and survive based on economics, and not. Mm-hmm. But they market that nationalism, and so you have I think you see that the effect is still there in Michigan. There's very, very strong love for those industries that supported a time that is now gone. But do those industries continue to do that? I would say no. When they're doing well, they did. Mm-hmm. They did when they were doing well. So it's a good question to ask.
The spirit of nationalism that kind of took over most of Detroit is, when you were interviewing the residents to still stay there and still suffer, do you still feel that there's that nationalism that's keeping them anchored, or is it necessity that is keeping them in the city?
In Detroit or in Flint?
In Flint.
In Flint. It's necessity that's keeping a lot of people there. Mm-hmm. But that nationalism is still strong. I don't know if Scott would agree with it. That nationalism there's still, we only drive GM. Nationalism, but I mean, it's the people are there for necessity. A lot of the people that are there can't leave,
and it feels as almost you have a wounded, you have a wound left over from a once devout parent who took care of you and provided, and then the parent leaves, and you're left with this sense of wanting those old days back, and you've kind of built your belief system on those successes, and it's as if that parent has moved on and the consideration is over, and it really feels like that a lot of times, and I think it's something that we're seeing more and more across this country as economics change,
And when we interviewed people that are in their 20s and in their 30s, 40s, or when they saw the film, when we talked to them, they were just like, these are the stories that I heard. These are the stories that I heard growing up from my great uncle or my great grandfather, my grandfather, my dad, like the generations that have grown up there. They heard these stories, and to see it on screen was very powerful for them, because I think when you pass down those stories, that that solidifies a lot of it. That kind of carries the memories you have, and that's your identity. That's a very powerful thing.
it was definitely important to us to lead into start with the present, but almost immediately switch to the historical, because we felt it was important to address that tone of negativity that seemed to be prevalent in those who in Michigan who didn't live in Flint, and this kind of I don't know, it was anger towards it, and we thought, you know what, we need to show people what it once was, and it's everything that everybody wants, and we thought that was very important. So we thought we wanted to surprise people with a positive entrance immediately following the present,
And when like I said earlier, when we talked to people, that's where a lot of people wanted to start, was to talk about the history of the community, because it was such a huge part of their identity. And let's talk about that first. And in some ways, it's about trauma as well, because those are traumatic events. That history, all those things that happened to this city there's layers of trauma there. And so, that's kind of where people wanted to start. They didn't want to start talking about, the lead crisis and all those events. They wanted to start, with the history of the community. And so that's where the film started. We wanted to kind of respect that too in their voice.
How do you feel that this whole experience has changed you both as human beings and as filmmakers?
I would say empathy. The goal of the film, as we went on, wasn't just to tell the story, but for us all to be empathetic to the challenges of economic change, empathetic to those who are suffering left in these environments. And, the constant thing that we would hear is, why don't they just move out? Why don't they just leave? And when you realize that your real estate tanks under you, and you've got, housing that you pass from generation to generation, you realize how people are stuck. And they're stuck by age and economics and a loss of work. And, we wanted to, as filmmakers, at least I wanted to bring that to light the more that we spent time with the people of Flint. And, I had a situation where I had a friend who was actually joined us for a day of production. He lives up there. He had kind of a negative sense of Flint. And literally after one day of production, being out there and hearing the voices of the fathers like himself who were suffering, and they're seeing, their children suffering based on the lead and the poisoning. Within 8 hours, he literally had completely flipped and was on social media the following day being like, we got to stand up for Flint. It was that impactful.
And for me, I think it reinforced kind of our general approach, which is we don't go with an agenda. We really don't. We're not going to look for anything specific. We go to listen to the community and let them kind of guide us, on the film and through the film, through the whole process. And it just kind of evolved. And I think this whole process, and it ended, in some ways not ended, but we finished with, the city. Once we finished the film, we went back and did preview screenings with everyone that helped us, everyone that was in the film, everybody. We could fill a whole theater with everybody that helped us. And when they saw it, they said, wow, they really got a great, strong response. And they said they wanted to bring it back to the city and show it to the city. And so they took ownership of the film and organized the premiere in Flint at the Capitol Theater. And we had over 600 people there because it's their story. So it just kind of, that whole 5 years of that process, just kind of letting them guide us through it and not knowing where we were going. And as we discovered new things, we had to do more research. They would say, "How have you seen the testimony on the Hill? We hadn't seen that. We had to go back and put that in. Have you heard about the Civil Rights Commission report? We hadn't seen that." Like all those points in the film, they gave us. They told us about. By listening to them and kind of letting them guide us. That's how the film kind of just came together over the 5 years. To me, that whole this project, this film, kind of reinforced that approach of not going with an agenda and going to let the community kind of guide us through the film. and so often people try to manipulate and make it, you go looking for something. We didn't go looking for anything. We went to listen and just tried to lift up what we heard, and it just kind of evolved.
Is there a light at the end of the tunnel for the people of Flint?
There's a core group of people there that love that city and love that community and are very proud. And there's lots of nonprofits there now. There's a lot of money coming in, funding coming in. Dr. Monahan Atisha is there doing her work.
The state obviously have thought so, in that they're investing highly in the college systems there. There's several expansion parts of University of Michigan, Michigan State that are in Flint. So it appears that there is an effort to come back of sorts. It's hard to know. It's hard to know. Technology can change your approach to a land and a place, and can give you new hope if you're able to address the damages that have been done. But the damages need to be addressed, and there's a lot. I mean,
there's reparations in order, honestly. I mean, when you have people that are going to be, disabled for the rest of their lives in various capacities, or have various forms of illness, and lead is, once you're poisoned by lead, it's with you for the rest of your life. So, there's generations of people, kids that are going to grow up, and you just don't know. And so that part of it is still unfolding, and we just don't know. They're going to be dealing with this for the rest of their lives. It's
and the entire state of Michigan is dealing with PFAS, which we didn't even get into in the water systems. And this is our most important water in the United States. What it feeds, and you just can't continue to not clean up and continue to pollute your resources without it affecting the people. And we thought it was important to bring up this aspect of it in relation to a model of how the U.S. has a tendency to deal with its past and its history.
But I was very hopeful seeing people come together. There was definitely a lot of groups coming together, and organizations coming together, and faith groups, and all different groups, really coming together and trying to fight through this. And also, they want to help other cities. That's why we have community leaders from Flint going to our screenings and presenting the film with us. And we're trying to go to cities that are dealing with water issues. So, I think the city of Flint and the leaders from Flint can lead that conversation in other cities that are dealing with water issues, because they've dealt with it. That's an important voice for other cities to hear. And in the cities we've gone to, you'd be surprised. We go to Baltimore, they're dealing with sewage in their water. We go to Atlanta, they're dealing with coal ash. Wilmington, North Carolina has the DuPont company and the chemicals in their water. You go to Iowa, and they're dealing with pesticides and other things in their water. So it really is in towns and cities all over the country, and we're just starting to discover this. And I think Flint has a voice in this and can help.
Is there anything that the average person out there that sees this documentary can do to help? Are there charities that people can donate to, or places they can actually volunteer at if they're within the vicinity?
In Flint?
Yes.
Yeah, so a lot of the groups in Flint that are doing the work, a lot of our faith groups, the United Methodists are doing a lot of work with lead mitigation. Greg Timmons, who's in our film, they have community centers where people come to get water, come to get services, and get connected with services. The Presbyterians are doing trauma work. They're doing lots of work around the city and in the community around trauma. The The Flint Community Foundation is a great group. They do lots of work with schools and health centers. And then Dr. Monahan Atisha, her work is amazing. You can just look her up. That work as well is great. I think anyone else, I could probably email you some more if you want me to.
Yeah, if you could, when I write the article up, I'd like to put links to those organizations in there just to help out, make it make it a little bit more substantial than just being a piece of audio.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, you do that.
I saw here that it's available today on Upstream Flicks. It's a service I'm not familiar with, but where is it going to be available through other streaming sites or through physical media within the future?
It's going to be on Amazon Prime, Google Play, iTunes, or Apple. It's going to be on Comcast, Cox, all the major cable companies, video on demand.
January 31st.
January 31st, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, on the 31st. Okay, perfect. All right. I'll put links up to all those services. I'll probably be able to find a direct link to the documentary itself, and I'll put that in there. All right. Okay, gentlemen.
Yep.
Thank you very much for your time. It was very eye-opening since, like I said at the beginning, it had been out of the media's cycle for so long that I had actually forgotten about it. And
yeah, sure.
I'm sure a lot of other people in the country have as well.
Yeah, that's one of the things that struck me was when we were working on this over the years, like we would tell people we were working in Flint, and the first thing people would say was, "Oh yeah, that's all fixed, right?" Right? And so that really struck us. I mean, we were always like, wow, people need to know. And so that's why that also influenced the approach to the film, was like, people need to know how this happened, why it happened. Because people had no idea how it happened, why it happened, and they needed to hear from the people, not politicians, not experts.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we made a real attempt we went to a real grassroots level, interviewing people at the water stations who were giving out the water, interviewing the pastors in the community that were visiting with sick people. We tried to go to the front lines of this to try to lift up, this is what's happening, because people had no idea. And that always surprised us.
Well, I think we also, we knew we were taking a challenging narrative approach in collecting all this information and putting it in one space. But we thought we really wanted to see if we could keep people on board through the narrative, change our narrative approach every few chapters, and give people a very clear blueprint of how this occurred, and that this will follow in many other communities in the United States. We give the numbers at the end of the 2,000
water systems in 5,300 cities.
Yeah.
In towns.
Where, here you are. This is how this happened. Here's the history. It should, and that, we wanted to take maybe this forgotten idea and say, look, this is important, because if you understand this, you're going to understand how it's going to affect your city. And we've already seen, we live in Atlanta, and we have the numbers. We've seen the numbers in incredible high levels of pollution in our waterways all over Atlanta. And you're seeing it in cities all over the country. And people aren't even, they're just not even aware of it.
Oh yeah, I live in Tampa, and I see the effects of industrial waste along the waterways of the Hillsborough River or on the beaches. It's just, some people don't care because they're making their money regardless of what they do, and they know that they have a safety net if it all goes tits up, so to say, that they can just move on to another position in another city and start all over again.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
And that approach has been going on here for hundreds of years. And and we wanted to make sure to identify that. I have family down in Tampa, so I'm familiar with it. I spent all my summers down in St. Pete. So
awesome. Yeah, I was just in St. Pete this weekend. It's one of those.
Yep.
It's one of those places that's it has a very bad homeless problem that they're just not solving. They're just gentrifying the area around the hobo camps and just hoping eventually they'll just leave without actually trying to solve the problem, without getting these people to help or jobs or housing or anything. It's just let's put as much construction around them, and maybe eventually they'll just shoo.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
you know, and if you look at what happened in Flint, they were trying to push people out. I mean, there's a whole nother narrative there that we lifted up about the liens on the houses and the water bills and homes being taken. And I mean, that's a reality in Flint too. I mean, there are blocks and blocks of houses that, you know, that can be bought for, you know, $100. You can buy the lot of land.
I'm surprised that the government didn't do what happened in Pennsylvania with that coal fire that's burning underneath that one city, where they just bought out the entire city and just forced everybody out. I'm surprised it doesn't happen. I mean, the coal fire, it's a nuisance. It's not really hurting people, but lead in the water will kill people, and the government's not taking it quite as seriously as an underground fire.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. And
It's-
like we
it's just-
and like we showed in the film, you know, in Lansing, they saw it coming, and over a number of years, they fixed it. They replaced all the pipes.
Yeah, the fact that that Lansing took the initiative ahead of it being a problem, and had learned from from what we understand, the mayor had visited Washington D.C. is where it hit first. It was in the early '90s. They had lead problems and poisoned kids, and they invited all these mayors to come to D.C. to learn about this. And he came back and he was like, "We need to do this. I think we may have these problems soon." And so they addressed them, and it's just crazy, you know, and so the governor was there during that. This was going on all over the city, and they were pulling up pipes and fixing this, and then Flint hit, and some of the breakthroughs in technology that were used in Flint were actually created in Lansing during that period, in how to pull pipe and relay it and such.
Yeah.
But now it was post after the fact, and the effect of not, putting those additives in that line, and the way that they approached it caused just irreparable damage to and corrosion to the entire system, that to this day, every time they pull pipes from a house, you basically create a potential for polluting the entire system. So every time that they say the water's clean now, well, if there's a house where they have to fix on it, you actually engage in the potential of that danger again. It's just crazy.
And the testing, from what I understand in the documentary, is they're flushing the system and then testing it, which dilutes the amount of toxicity in that water, which seems very cheap to me. It seems almost devious in a way.
Absolutely. And it was standardized by the federal government. That they actually taught the state and the local municipalities, this is how you want to do this. So you're 100% on.
And thankfully they updated that rule in 2017.
Yeah.
So one more thing I want to tell you, like the reality that's still there. When we did the premiere in Flint, the day before, 2 days before the premiere, Jim, who's in the film a lot, Jim, who was in the film at the beginning, him and his wife Denise, Jim called me and said he wasn't going to be able to make it to the premiere because he's in the hospital. Still dealing with, 5 years later, still dealing with the lead issues in his body. And he couldn't even come to the premiere. Neither could Gordon, another guy that's in the film. They both called us and were like, "We're so sorry we can't make it. We really want to be there. We're going to send our wives there. Our family will be there," but they couldn't leave the hospital. So that's the reality of what's going on in Flint too. I mean, people are still dealing with it every day.
It's really heartbreaking, and I applaud you gentlemen for tackling this issue. I know documentary filmmaking is a thankless job at the end of the day, and the way you guys presented it was excellent. It's one of the best documentaries I've seen in quite a while. And even though I don't live in Flint, I don't have to deal with these problems. It's just, I wish I could do more to help.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, in a lot of ways, that was our goal, was to get this out and get the voice out and get people aware of this, because we felt a sense of helplessness working on it. And when you have reverends who are sharing with you their sense of hopelessness, it's like it's a very different feeling when they are maxed out, when they don't feel like they can help people. It's shocking. It's a very different, you realize the level of effect that you're dealing with. So yeah, it was crazy.
And we want people to ask these questions in their own cities, in Tampa, in Atlanta, in, you know what I mean? Like I think the hope for us is that people will watch this and be like yourself, like, God, what can I do? Well, what's going on in my city? And I guarantee you there are organizations in Tampa that are working on water issues right now, and access to clean water. And I mean, it's happening everywhere. It's just people aren't aware of it. We live in Atlanta, and we weren't even aware of all the coal ash issues. We went to our own screening in Atlanta, and we had an environmental group come that's been working on the issues around the state. And we were both like, we had no idea the issues that Atlanta's having, and we live there, and we've been working on a film about water. So, I mean, I just think everybody in their own city needs to ask those questions and look at their water quality and ask and find out who's working and who's helping to make sure everyone has clean, safe access to drinking water, because, that's a human right.
Yeah, and if we were able, when we have these showings, I mean, the one thing that I always share is, if the one and only thing, if you want to do one and only thing, go home and filter your water. Don't drink from that tap anymore, because chances are, when people realize there's this old, I think we were raised in a period where we used to drink from the hose. I can't say that was any healthier. Now we know better, and it's time to apply that knowledge. The water systems in our country are just not drinkable and safe anymore. And they, I think powers that be want to continue to lead people to believe otherwise. And they, low-level research shows quite the opposite. They are not safe to be drinking from. And yeah, like start point is filter the water. You filter your water,
Yeah, we have no choice here because our water tastes like pure chlorine.
Yeah,
right. And there's reasons for that. Yeah, that
exactly.
usually means that they're trying to kill things.
Yeah.
It's even worse when you use it to make ice, because it gets super potent. You just open up the freezer and you're like, God damn.
Yeah.
I don't know. You add some bourbon to that ice, it's all right?
No, it makes everything taste awful. I have a filtration system. I just change the filter every month. That's how bad it gets, because it eats through that carbon filter like nothing.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But I'm glad to be paying that $120 water bill when I only use like a handful of gallons every month.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that had shocked us beyond belief, was that Flint residents were paying the highest prices for their water, and it was completely unthinkable. I mean, that was just
that we thought that wasn't true. We're like, that can't be true.
Like,
yeah, sure enough, it was.
They're more or less paying for their own tombstones, more or less.
Yeah,
it's horrible. That's absolutely despicable that you would charge people that much for their screw up.
Absolutely.
Right. And then when they wouldn't pay the bills, they were letting them add up. So people had $1,500 bills, $1,200 bills, and then put liens on their houses if they didn't pay them. And if they didn't pay them, they'd take the house. So
it's like, what's the worst you can do? You could force me out of this home where I no longer have to drink this toxic water. Thanks for the favor.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, gentlemen, that's all the time we have for today. And again, thank you very much. I truly appreciate this film, and I hope we get a screening down here, because with how much conservation we have to take into account in Florida, we really need to start focusing on what companies are doing that impacts this environment, because it's so fragile down here. So when you guys come down, let me know. I'll definitely be there.
Yeah, we would love to. We're doing a grassroots screening campaign, so go to our website, reach out to us if you're interested in hosting a screening in your city or in your town or with your organization or anyone. So, yeah, please reach out to us.
What is the website so people know?
flintpoisoning.org.
All right, perfect. Thank you guys very much.
We're also on Facebook.
You guys have a good night, and hopefully get to talk to you again soon.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mike. Thank you. Take care.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.